Okay, everybody, welcome back to Tell Us, our show, podcast, recording Monday nights. I got Philippe Saraji here in the studio. Don't try to spell his name. I'm Andy here hosting, and we're going to have a conversation on Christian apologetics. Philippe is a good friend, and we had a 2-week break. We have good excuses, but they're excuses. And one was a snowstorm that came in, and but we put up a good blog post for that. You can check that out on our Facebook page. And then the following Monday was President's Day. But to be honest, we were just all enjoying the day off. I mean, we could have recorded. We just thought we'd take it easy. Anyways, we got Philippe here, and he's going to start off with his testimony. He's going to tell us a little bit about his background story. Philippe.
All right. Well, I mean, what can I say? I got saved when I was 13 years old, and right away, you know, as a young man or as a young person, you know, you have this idea that you enter into something and you don't really understand it. So I was in the church maybe for a couple of years, and then I decided, you know, when I was in high school, that maybe this is not for me for sure, and so I left the church for a couple of years, and in that couple of years, this is where I developed the interest for apologetics, because I was wondering if everything I heard in the church was actually true or if it made any sense. And I had a friend who was in our church who was very interested in apologetics, and I had some very good answers, and were just basically helping me sorting through my questions and my doubts that I had as a young Christian. And in France, it's very interesting because when you go to high school, you actually it's mandatory for you to have philosophy. And the first time I sat in a class of philosophy was very interesting because the professor was saying, well, the idea is that when you have philosophy, it's for you to discover by yourself what is true and develop critical thinking. So I thought maybe it's the first time I'm going to have an opportunity to do that, because when you sit in church where you're preached at, this is what I thought, and then you have just got to believe what you're told, and that would be it. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, well, here's my opportunity, right? And the first click for me was interesting how the lack of answers I would get in a class of philosophy, that when you go beyond the shallow, usual conversations about philosophy, and then we have some deep questions, and there's no answers. And I would ask the same questions to my friend who was in church, and he had the real good answers. And I realized that little by little that the first realization for me was that, well, the life I thought would be meaningful to me without God is actually meaningless. And the life that I thought would be meaningless to me with God is actually meaningful. Not just in terms of my daily life, but also in terms of how it answers my intellectual questions. So I came back to the church, maybe I was around 18, I went to Bible college, and right away I was interested, you know, into apologetics, and from then I just took my sweet time and studied it for a long time. So
Okay, so let me let everyone know who we've got here. This is Philippe, born in France, okay?
You picked the accent?
You picked that up from the accent, for sure. He served as director for Bible colleges in Nimes in southern France and in Paris, where he also taught for more than 20 years. I'm reading a little bio on him that I've got here. He met Christ at the age of 13, as he said, and attended Theological Institute, missionary. How do you translate that into English?
You would say Theological and Missionary Institute.
Okay, great. And that was in Paris, right?
No, that was in the south.
Oh, in the south of France. Earning his bachelor in theology. He also graduated from Luther Rice University, which is here in the United States. That's in Georgia.
Yep.
With a Master of Arts in Ministry, also from the Faculty of John Calvin. That's in France.
Yeah, southern France, yeah.
Southern France, okay. And a DEA postgraduate degree in apologetics, right? And now he's got to connect. What's your relationship with Westminster Theological Seminary?
Well, no real connection there. I just after my postgraduate studies, I entered into a PhD program when I had to learn about the specific topic, which is one kind of apologetics. And Westminster is known as the place to go for that. And so they invited me. I was, they call a visiting scholar. So I was there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's more recent. What years were you around?
2002, 2014.
Oh, okay.
2012, sorry, 2014.
Oh, 2012. Okay, great. And now, exciting for us here in Baltimore, you're serving as the director of Maryland Bible College and Seminary, our college here on the campus.
The last 3 years.
That's great. And how has it been so far?
It's been great. It's been great. I mean, just like everywhere you go and God puts you into a place of ministry, it's always a challenge because the ministry is as much as for you as it is for the people you're serving. So yeah, it's talking about apologetics. It's very interesting to see that the Western mind cannot be put together in one group. The Western mindset of Western Europe and the Western mindset of America is very different also.
In their approach to academics?
Well, approach to academics also, but I think in a way is that the educational system actually brings Europeans to think younger about deeper things than American would. It's once you enter into university that you challenge maybe with the big questions. So there is a kind of, not to be offensive, but there is kind of immaturity among the young Americans compared to the young Europeans.
And that's still the case today?
Yes, it's still the case, yeah.
Okay. Is it actual content or just the skills of learning, like critical thinking skills?
I think critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
It's the difference. Something that you learn here later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and unfortunately, maybe with the idea of with less capacity to discern, in a way, you know.
Do you think that there's an equal amount of agenda behind the education system in both Western Europe and United States?
But I see a big difference. Like yes, I think educational systems, whether in Europe or here in America, do have agenda, very similar agenda. But what I do see in America that I haven't seen in Europe is that in France, for example, where I grew up and I was in seminary and also in college, you realize that almost like France has been a secular country for more than 100 years. So religion is not really considered an enemy. Like Christianity is not considered an enemy. So there's no real fight. There is no real agenda in the sense that we don't target maybe Christians or we don't target God, in our lectures in universities. As over against here in America, I think in a way like it's been a Christian country for so long that it seems that those who have an agenda, behind the academics are actually targeting Christians.
It's like a teenager trying to get free from his parents. That's
Exactly.
like our phase right now.
It is exactly that. Hence the importance, I think, for apologetics in America.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm a middle school teacher, as I've said on the show before, and I'm wanting to introduce critical thinking skills because I see how important it is. And then just the relevance of education. I think our young people are entirely disenchanted with any. There's a total disconnect from a motivation to learn. And so our young people are in a pretty bad, I can't really speak for Western Europe, but not knowing.
Yeah.
What, let's define apologetics then.
Well, that's a very wide topic, but like to summarize, I would say, you have two levels of apologetics, not levels, but two layers of apologetics. You have the actual thinking about what apologetic is, that's going to be the philosophy of apologetic, and then you have the doing, which is actually how do you go about using arguments. And in the doing of apologetics, you have several understanding of what actually is important in apologetics. Let's say you have the very famous one, which we call the evidentialist apologetics, who actually lays a lot of weight on the evidence as a way to bring people to the gospel. And then you have other ways which will actually think that the role of apologetics should be submitted to evangelism, meaning that you're there to preach Christ and answer questions, not preach the arguments and eventually preach the gospel. The difference here is very important because it helps us define what apologetic is. Like if you think that maybe reason and evidence would be the number one way to bring people to the gospel, you'll have one kind of apologetics. Now, if you think that the role of apologetics is some kind of a support for evangelism, then the way you develop apologetics will be different. That's why I spoke about philosophy first.
Before that, you said that there's the work of apologetics, and then there's the action of apologetics.
Yes.
You made that distinction.
Well, the idea is like if you want to think about what apologetics should be, that's the philosophy, the thinking or the theory of what it should be. And then depending on how you conclude what apologetics should be, what the role of apologetics should
Like
be.
the great Christian thinkers
Yes.
through church history, they were doing apologetics on a theoretical level.
Yes.
Okay.
And then once you know what the role of apologetics should be, then you define how you go about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, I think it's I shifted from like a very strong evidentialist approach to a more evangelistic approach, in the sense that you use the technical term.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is like when I go about meeting someone and in the street or a friend or whatever, then my goal is not to convince them with arguments. My goal is to preach the gospel.
Yeah.
Right. And by preaching the gospel, and then the dialogue will lead me to answer questions that are rational or require maybe apologetic or arguments.
Because it ties in with your goal, with the goal of apologetics.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So
your goal isn't to be intellectually coherent.
No, because if you are intellectually coherent, which I assume you're supposed to be as a Christian, because if the word of God does not make any sense, then we have a problem. So it has to be coherent. It has to be rational. It has to be intelligent in a way, and it is. But the goal is for me to actually bring the gospel to someone and answer the objective questions they may have. Because the point is, like, if I take apologetics for what it is, I think I use 4 words to define it, very simple words. Number 1 is persuasion. I'm here to persuade you that the gospel is true. Not to convince you intellectually, because conversion is not merely intellectual. It is intellectual. You have to be convinced, but it is mostly spiritual. We know that the Bible says in John 16:8 that the Holy Spirit is the one that convinces us of sin, judgment, and righteousness. So, as I know you love apologetic very much, we discussed that many times, but the idea is for you and I, or anybody really who uses apologetics, is like I need to have the tools to answer the right questions. So the more I know about it, the more equipped I am to answer maybe a wider range of questions.
So persuasion requires understanding?
Well, persuasion first requires the focus. What is my focus? My focus is bringing the gospel. I want you to be persuaded, not just merely intellectually convinced. Because even in the Bible, people have agreed with Christ, but they have not done anything about it. I'm sure today, if you talk to people in the street and then you find some very good verses in the Bible, they would agree with what Jesus says. Does not make them Christian, right? So I'm here because first is persuasion. Okay. The second one, it would be vindication. I'm here to make a plea, to vindicate, for that matter. I'm here to make a point. And once I understand what those 2 roots objectives are, persuasion and vindications, I'm going to use 2 different methods to do it, which leads me to the 2 other words, offensive and defensive. Mm-hmm. When I say offensive, I'm not saying to be offending, right? But we're saying to be offensive like in a war. You go about, you have an offense, you have a defense. And when you have to understand what those 2 words are to understand what apologetic is. Defense, the defense.
These are 2 modes of apologetics, right?
Yeah, you'll be in either modes depending on how your dialogue goes. Somebody says, well, let's say you go and I meet someone and I want to preach the gospel. I may start with John 3:16 and explain what John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And he might ask a question, so, but can you explain more? So I'm explaining, and then he raises a question that is actually very objective. How do we know that Jesus Christ was the Son of God? Then this is a defensive questions. Okay, I'm going to bring arguments. I'm going to bring evidence for you to go along.
You want to prove a statement you made.
Yes, I'm defending my thesis. If you want. So I'm defending my thesis. It could be in front of questions or against arguments against what I'm saying. But the other part of apologetics, which is many, many times forgotten, is the offensive apologetics. Because I might say, or somebody might say, I don't really believe in God. I think, thinking about God doesn't make any sense to me. And I go, how does your worldview without God makes any sense? Let's talk about that. That would be the offensive. The idea would be, I want to show you by my arguments that a life without God is meaningless. So it's not just me defending my worldview, is me helping you seeing how your worldview is actually not adequate intellectually. So that would be the offensive side of
You kind of put it back on them. Well, can you explain this for me then?
Yes.
Okay, I want to understand you. Then you're going to have to start asking some questions.
Yes.
Probably that would be the mode.
Yeah, and I think it's the offensive side of apologetic is very important, because one thing that we don't really have as a skill many times, even as Christians, even though I want to persuade people, I need to be a good listener. Because if you bring an argument, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. I don't want to answer beside the point, because if I answer beside the point, I'm not going anywhere. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. I want to know what your worldview is. I'm very interested in knowing what you're saying, because I want to address what you're saying so we are on the same page.
We might be too quick to categorize them or say, okay,
Yes.
they're an atheist. They don't believe in God.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I could
you
ask
should
you.
probe.
Yeah. I mean, I could ask you the question: how many atheists have you met that are actually not atheists in your life?
That are not.
Yeah. Not really. When you actually
Oh,
nail down
right.
what they are.
Yeah, yeah,
Are they
yeah,
really?
yeah.
They're not.
Right, right.
Oh, they may
One-
be agnostics, or they may be all kinds of things, but they are not atheists.
One time I did have a kind of a pointed response to someone, and it was just on the street. I said, "Oh, really? Are you an atheist emotionally or intellectually or rationally?" Right? Like kind of like
Yeah.
making the distinction. And he said probably a little bit of both.
Yes.
So then that kind of indicates there's some understanding of that there probably is a God, but I just don't like the idea of him, or I
Yes.
don't really want to get to know him. I'm not interested in him. So then how could he's not really an atheist at that
No,
point,
he's not.
right? And that's probably a huge portion of the people that we're like interacting with.
To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever met more than 10 real atheists in my life.
Mhm.
Like, people actually are saying it because they thought about it, they argue with it, and they're capable of actually saying, and it's very telling when you think about this. Like,
You're saying only the ones that could defend their view that there is no God are genuine atheists?
yeah, they made a decision out of at the end of an argument that it's not just I heard
What
in
if they-
school or I read a book or I actually thought about it,
Oh,
and this
okay.
is my conclusion. And they actually were sitting on their chairs, an atheist, and arguing from that vantage viewpoint.
I mean, well, the same could be said about Christians. I mean, aren't there a lot of Christians that you could talk, especially in Baltimore City? It's very Christianized culture. They're going to say, I believe in God, but what does that really mean, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
I mean, it goes both ways.
Yes.
So you're using persuasion. You're using vindication.
Yes.
Vindication is, say that again?
I'm making the idea is you're making a point. You're making a plea.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're. It's not like defending. It's more like a lawyer would make a case. When you have a court case, and then you would have like the lawyer would have that role. Like, he's actually at the end of the trial. Then both parties will speak, and the lawyer will actually like make his point. Like, if I say, like, if I want to persuade someone with the gospel, I want you to remember that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, the power of the preaching of the cross is huge. It's something we forget sometimes. So I'm using that power for persuasion. But my vindication comes almost as a persuasion that is surrounded by an intelligent way of presenting the gospel. I'm making a case. I'm going point by point by point to make a case. That is also a very important part of apologetics.
What would you call like in a lot of churches, traditional churches, they'll have an altar call at the end of the sermon, and they'll say, would anyone like to come to Christ? How does that play into these four words?
I would say persuasion.
Persuasion?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a plea.
It's a
But
It's a plea, but the vindication in apologetics is more like an argumented plea,
uh-huh.
which in
Okay.
altar call is not really argumented. It's just presenting the gospel in its pure form.
Yeah, but the altar call is like a persuasion, like come
Yes.
to Christ.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess I see apologetics being very helpful today in our culture because we live in a post-Christian, in many ways. Maybe you wouldn't say that. Maybe you wouldn't call. Would you call America a post-Christian
Yes.
society?
I
how
would.
how would you define that?
Well, you define that because, like, in a Christian society, people are having an understanding and at least a respect for the Christian heritage. When you deny the obvious Christian heritage that you have, you actually are in a post-Christian society.
Deny what?
Well, your Christian heritage.
Okay, yeah.
Right? I mean, it's the case in Europe, it's the case in America. Like when you see people just go about like denying the past and denying history and all the current trends and thoughts that are happening in America about, maybe the role of the Constitution, the role of the Supreme Court, or all these questions people are asking, you see that the battle is about it's not about just how to interpret the Constitution, but I think for me it's also how people see where it came from. Like Christian, we say this is a Christian country, and people are saying no, it's not. So it's more like, and actually it is. I'm sorry that you're offended by this, but it is, at least in its roots.
So rejecting Christianity forces them to reject the foundation of the country in part.
Yes, and
such as the Constitution.
Well, not so much the Constitution, but the reason why it's there.
Okay.
Like the argument over the Constitution, really, when you look at it, it's about, whether, in a way, simply put, is God behind it or not? And the Christian would say, well, the way the country was formed was because of Christianity, and people are saying no, it's not that. They are denying that Christian heritage, so it becomes a post-Christian society because people are not even willing to recognize the roots of the country.
So you're saying that there's a disrespect for it, and this is what makes it a post-Christian society. Disrespect for Christianity.
I mean, those who know disrespect it, but the young generations don't have a clue about it.
Not even a clue.
No.
So it's not even a disrespect. It's just an ignorance of it.
There's no.
So then,
like maybe 20 years ago, if you would ask, if you do a survey, how many people have heard about Christ, and today the numbers are huge. The difference.
This is crazy. Okay, because this is connecting with a recent conversation I had with a young person Saturday, just 2 days ago. I dropped the name Billy Graham, and he didn't know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blown away. I pulled up my phone. I showed him a picture. I'm like, really? I'm like, I don't know how many, like 100 million people. I don't know how many people he spoke to in his life. Crazy number, whatever, all over the world. And he didn't know Billy Graham. He was like my age, close to 30. So that's becoming more and more real. I mean, the political thing in the United States, I mean, it's like very blue on the coasts, very red in between. And I don't know. Yeah, maybe in different parts of the country it's different. I've really only lived on the East Coast, but it's evident, in urban America that there's a rejection of God and the practice of faith.
I think it's also connected to what you said earlier about, the is there an agenda behind our academic programs? And actually the answer is yes, there is. We're trying to rethink what we've known, and we're trying to, in a way, rewrite the history,
In Europe, because they're getting, you would say, a better education in Western Europe.
I wouldn't say better. I would say like it's earlier. Like you asked, you proposed those questions earlier.
They're getting a higher level of education, earlier, or a less dumbed down education. Do you think it's good? They're in a good spot for young people to come to faith there?
I think I see a difference. Like the generation of my parents, like the 60s and 70s, maybe they were, it's just like the hippie movement in a way was interesting because in France, the hippie movement was like getting away from God. In America, you had a revival among young people in the 70s, right? So the same period, two different approach of the spiritual things. Now, in France, people have rejected authority, they've rejected God, and the famous date in France is May 1968, where there was a big, uproar of people in the streets. And so the idea was like really to have a society that is more free, not in terms of freedom, but in terms of free to do whatever you want ethically. I could do whatever I want with my life, not about being free for the government. That was not the issue. But it's interesting that the children and grandchildren of that generation, which is my generation, and people that have children, my age that have children, those two generations, especially the young ones, maybe 25 and younger, when you meet them in the street, they're very interesting about the spiritual things compared to those who are 25 years and older. They would not be as interested. The people 60, 70 years old, they don't even have anything to do with God when you meet them in the street. But the young generation, and the reason why is because there is a void in the French society that people want to, like there is no meaning, there's no purpose. People are
a
afraid
value
of the
system,
future.
a lack of value system,
but also an understanding of something that is transcendent.
Transcendent.
Yeah,
that's a good subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, the young people are yearning for a transcendent.
Yeah, they try to have, they try to find some, and then as I said, for me, it was the same thing when I was in high school. Like, it's interesting because I didn't go into details, but when you're in high school in France, it's mandatory for you to take philosophy, whatever your major is, because you do major in high school in France. And so the idea is like, okay, so the class of philosophy will actually help you guys have critical thinking and learn things for yourself. And it was interesting because the only way to succeed in the philosophy class was when you were asked a question and write an essay is to answer with the outline that you were given, which is ironic.
Right.
Because how do you want me to learn by myself if you actually want me to learn all the questions and the answers as go with
and
it?
the answers.
And if I want to have extra points, I would have to quote someone that I read, meaning I'm asking somebody else to give his opinion for me.
There's almost no independent thought.
There's no independent thought
in the process.
So it's gonna have a really limited time span for me. You know, when you're 15,
Right.
16, 17, 18, it's not gonna work for long. This emptiness is not gonna work for long.
So you found that, and you said this as a young person, you thought, I'm empty in the church. Let's see if there's something out there.
Yes.
And then you said, I'm more empty, or what was it? How would you say it?
Well, I thought that, well, the point that I made is I thought that actually my life in church would be meaningless and my life in the world would be meaningful. You know, that's how people sell that to you. You know, go out there and make a difference, you know, and find your purpose. And you go out there, you do that, and you realize that actually the purpose is meaningless in itself.
Oh, the purpose itself that's on offer.
Yes.
Philosophically.
Yeah, there is nothing there.
The worldview is that.
Has no coherence
and
at all.
say that and
yes.
say how that is true, that their worldview is incoherent.
Well, I mean, it would be a very like a broad topic, but I think when you think about this way, there are so many things like if you split the two understanding of the worldviews, if there is a God, there is no God, then the consequence is that you're created or you're not created. If you're created, even if you take that on the theoretical level, you know, if you talk to someone, if I've been created by someone, whether I like it or not, I have a beginning, I have an end, I'm going somewhere, and I have a purpose, whether I do like it or not.
Could you say you have a telos?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Thank you.
The idea is like, okay, if I have my phone right here, and this phone, even though it's an object, it has a purpose. It has a meaning, and it has a value. And the value is how much I pay for it. The purpose is what I do with it. But in a way, if I evolve, if you and I, if there is no God, if we evolve, then we come out of nowhere. We're going nowhere. So we don't have any meaning. We don't have any value. We don't have any purpose. I'm actually, if I die tomorrow, the world is going to continue spinning around itself. It won't make any difference in 99.99% of the people on the earth. They won't even care. And so in a way, so we might.
That's relative versus absolute. The Christian worldview provides absolute meaning, value, and purpose.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, because there's a difference there as well.
Yes, there is. I mean, yeah, because I can find my own purpose if I want to, but in the biggest scheme of things, it doesn't make anything because I'm fooling myself by actually borrowing the idea of purpose to the Christian worldview in a world where there is no purpose. Like if we evolved, there is no purpose in myself. So when you look at all, you know, like you go online and look at people maybe on social media, and then you have those coach, they tell you, you know, like you have to find your meaning, you have to find your purpose in life. All these language that we are using, you know, are actually borrowed from the Christian worldview because we can.
That's an important point.
Yeah, we can say we have purpose because God has one. But if I'm not coming from anywhere, I'm just evolved, you know, after 3.5 billion of evolution years. I'm just random.
We would say we want you to live a life of meaning, value, and purpose, but your worldview isn't giving you that.
No.
Right?
The only way for a non-Christian to live is to borrow the Christian worldview.
Right, exactly.
Intellectually. Like, think about this way. Like in our conversations, maybe sometimes we spoke about the place of reason, you know, there are a few things that don't make any sense when God is done in the picture. Number one, you don't know where you come from. You don't know where you're going. You don't have purpose. You don't have meaning. You don't have value. But the other thing also is like you cannot account for the reliability of your reasoning process. Because if you take the evolutionary process where everything was random. Nothing was really designed with a purpose. Otherwise, nature would have an intelligence, and nature would be in charge of evolution. Nature would be in charge of a selecting process of natural selection.
We're attributing something to nature that's
We're
not
attributing
natural.
intelligence to nature, which actually we're borrowing again the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
Instead of admitting that there is a God, we're giving nature the attributes of God.
Right.
It's very interesting. It's when you go into, like, I love nature shows. I really do. I look at them. It's very interesting for me. I love animals, the wild, and so I look at those. And 99% of the time, people spoke about nature as Mother Nature.
Right.
It's we're trying to find
Personhood.
comfort.
They're attributing personhood to this thing.
We're trying to find comfort into the idea that okay, Mother and nature is like, it's, like I'm okay. I'm in something that has a purpose. But the reasoning process actually is something very interesting, because, and I try to explain that to the students in my class. Sometimes it's not easy to understand, but if you bear with me, I can explain to you the argument. But if you ask anybody who is an evolutionist, like, how can you account for the reliability of your reasoning process? Like, if you come from 3.5 billion years of evolution and randomness, how can you explain such an organized and reliable process that we call thinking? Okay, that's the idea. So if you ask the question, which some Christians have asked, evolutionists and scientists, and William Ramsay, which is a very famous, known Canadian scientist, an atheist, he said, well, he used the idea that if you don't know how to make a difference between a cat and a tiger, you will be eaten, right? So for you not to be eaten, you need to have the capacity to make a difference between the cat and the tiger. So nature gave you that capacity, right? So by giving you the capacity, it raises a lot more questions than answers. Because
this is like a sociological evolution concept, right?
Well, yes, it is. But the idea is, like, we come from no intelligence.
For survival's sake, we developed intelligence or reason.
Yeah. If you summarize, that's what he says. For survival's sake, we develop intelligence or cognitive capacities. But it raises a lot more questions than it actually answers, because actually you're saying that someone or somehow, something knew I was going to need it down the road and gave it to me.
The actual faculty or capacity.
Yes. So it means the actual capacity to think was designed with someone that was capable of designing capacity to think. It is huge when you think about that. You know what I'm saying? So if you say that if nature has no course it's going down to, which is supposed to be evolution, we could go here, go anywhere.
You're saying you can't escape the rationality.
No. You can escape that. If you want your reason to be reliable, it has to come from something that designed it. And whether you call it God or nature, you have to accept the idea that someone designed. Because if I see someone that is going to have down the road, I want this species to be able to survive, so I need to give that species the capacity to make a difference between the cat and the tiger. So that means that, number one, I need to foresee the need. Number two, I need to design an answer. So meaning I'm more intelligent than whoever is going to need that rational thinking, because I designed the rational thinking to be able to function.
Perfect.
I mean, I don't consider myself, I don't think I'm dumb, but I'm not highly intelligent, but I'm incapable of designing a computer. But someone who designed the computer had to be thinking about it. That's the idea. The if rational process has not been designed, and we have to ask, how do we get it? And the worst thing, I think,
they're undermining their own reasoning process.
Yeah, they're saying faith doesn't work. We have to
rely on reason.
But as Chesterton used to say, reason.
I suppose they could be satisfied with just its sheer survival value, but even that breaks down. You're saying
no, because it actually is self-defeating. Because if you're saying I'm only interested in the value of survival, then you're actually saying that there is value somewhere.
Okay.
Which is survival.
Yeah.
Where do you get that from?
I mean, for a person on the street, like if I was that person, I would say, like, yeah, I'm interested in survival. So what? What's consistent with that worldview, right?
Yeah, but I mean, why would you want to survive? Yeah. What purpose does it serve?
Oh God. Now I have to. Did I just invoke God? Oh God.
Yes, you did.
There was a funny story about that, actually. Who was that? The biologist.
I think it was Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins.
Who
Yeah, he
got
couldn't. That's right.
On a radio show.
He
one
couldn't
day.
remember because he was
The
saying
full
Christians.
title, yes.
He was saying Christians don't know their Bible. You know, it's like,
Yes.
oh, it's their Bible. They have no idea. You just ask them a few stupid, simple questions. They
Yes.
wouldn't be able to answer. And the interviewer asked him,
What's the title of the entire title of the book from Richard Darwin, the foundational book for evolution? He was not able to answer the question.
because it's like a long subtitle or something.
Well, it is a long subtitle.
So
yes.
funny. Yeah, yeah. And he's like, oh, God. And so he was calling on God to help him remember the book that disproves him.
Yes.
Okay.
But, like one more thing about the rational idea, because I think it's important to realize that what non-Christians want is they want to separate faith and reason by being opposite. Like if you have reason, you don't have faith. If you have reason, you don't. If you have reason, you don't have faith. Vice versa. But in the same dialogue you have with, like, let's say William Ramsay, that Canadian philosopher, if you ask him, how do I, like, if my reason process was given to me by evolution for me to be able to sort things through, then you're saying that I'm wrong to think that there is a God, right? If I argue for God, my reasoning process is actually fooling me into thinking that there is a God, correct?
Yeah, they do think that, right?
Well, they do think that. But now, okay, so you're saying that my reasoning process is reliable by showing me the difference between a cat and tiger, but fooling me in not making a difference between God and atheism. So the point is, when is my actual reason fooling me? When you know what I'm saying? It's the idea is if you ask the question, what is, how can your reasoning be reliable without God? They're telling you it's not reliable because it can fool you to believe that there is a God. So they don't even have, in their own answer against God, they are actually diminishing the role of reason, which is very interesting to me. It's kind of self-defeating.
Now, let's talk about apologetics. So far, we've talked about apologetics as a means for winning people to Christ or for the sake of the gospel, right? But what about apologetics serving the Christian, the Christian wanting to be coherent in his own worldview, and the Christian asking himself, do I know what is true? Do I know what I believe to be true? Don't you think that is of, I don't know, equal value in apologetics?
Yes.
Do you see a need for Christians to study apologetics for their own sake?
Yes. Yeah, I think, as I said in my own testimony, I think it made a difference for me.
Right.
I had to understand. I think it's also the mark of this new generation, maybe what we call the millennial and younger. The difference that I see between my generation and the young generation is that maybe my generation was okay with knowing what to believe. And I was never okay with the idea, that hence the apologetics for me, but it's okay for me to know what to believe. Now, the younger generations, they want to know what to believe, but they want to know why they have to believe that. And it's a new layer.
Whys are always tough questions.
The why is always a tough question. And I think if the church is not able to answer, they will find the answer somewhere else.
Okay.
Not that the answer is valid necessarily outside, but actually someone took the time to answer the question.
Well, there's good Christian content out there, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm saying the church in general. I'm not saying the local church, per se. But I think it's in the local church. It's important to have that also.
Yeah. So it could be incorporated in the teaching ministry of the church.
It could. Yeah. I mean, whatever. It could be within a teen ministry, young adults ministry. It could be in the Bible college. It could be in Bible study. It could be in the church.
There's a lot of ways that could happen, right?
Yes.
Maybe we could give some practical suggestions. It could be like a book club. Right?
A book club is a great idea.
Around a book, because there's like good apologetics material out there that's being read in a group setting.
Yeah, there are some books that are really amazing to that. Like if you think like Reason for God with Tim Keller, or Mere Christianity, with C.S. Lewis, or the trilogy by Francis Schaeffer. You know, that those books are actually amazing for conversations.
And we've got a Bible college that's like a more organized, structured education system, and that's aiding the young people in discipleship.
Yes.
And apologetics could serve a purpose in that as well, right?
Yeah. In the Bible college, we have a class of apologetics, a semester dedicated to the study of apologetics.
Because this goes back to the education system and raising children effectively, and then obviously raising children in a Christian context, a Christian family wanting to raise children up in the Lord, and that they would seek God in their early adult age. Questions arise naturally, right?
Yes.
I mean, it did for you at a young age.
Mhm.
It did for me at a young age. I mean, I grew up in a Christian home, and I remember thinking hard about the subject of hell, right? Like, can there really, is God good, allowing evil, and there being a place for the damned, or however that gets communicated? There's good questions to be asked. Probably young people get mixed responses when they're asking these questions from the older generation. Maybe they are the questions accepted or not? I mean, of course, we can't speak to that really, but
I mean, we could, in a sense, because I think it's very important. Because the idea, as I said, like if you grew up in a generation when you ask what you believe is enough, you won't understand if you're not careful. People asking why, and like if you
give an example of what to believe.
Well, I don't know. You were saying, for example, that the Bible is
that
reliable.
there is a hell.
Maybe. Oh, there is a hell, or the Bible is reliable.
Or that the Bible is reliable.
Yeah. And people, you might be content to answer an older generation. Okay, I'm listening to them, receiving this.
So you're saying the older generation would be like, okay, just tell me what I need to know?
Yes.
Because there's a faith, there's a trust.
It's not that. It's like there's no opposition.
There's no opposition.
We're going back to the post-Christian society in which we're in.
Right.
If you ask anybody who goes to college that is a Christian, he's going to face adversity every single day of his life. Because he's presented as a bigot, he's presented as an old-fashioned, he's presented as someone who is anti-progress or has an agenda, or he's like
anti-intellectual,
or actually narrow-minded. So, like 40 years ago, I think you didn't face that even in college. So now here you are, you're listening on Sunday morning, you go to church or whatever, you go to church, and then you go to college. What you're hearing is actually very different. 40 years ago was very similar. It could be a Christian be very well accepted 30, maybe 20 years ago. Now, if you go into even the workplace, people are thinking because there's an agenda in society to change the narrative of the society, what it should be, then you're in a society where you actually are presented as the bad guy. So if you're asking me to put my head on the pillar, I want to know why I'm doing this. And I think it's a fair question. So I should not take, like I have conversation with young people sometimes, and they ask me questions that I'm not bothered by it because I'm used to it, but it's a basic question. How do I know that everything I believe is true? That's a very good question. Let's talk about this. What in particular do you want to talk about? And we should be okay with that. If we're not okay with it, we're setting the signal that you're going to have to find your answer somewhere else, and that somewhere else might be on the other camp.
Do you think that everyone has to go through a struggle in their faith? Or do some people, it's just smooth sailing, no problem? You've probably witnessed both.
Yes, both. I think it really depends how you go about understanding what your faith is. The point is right. The reasoning process is not the end of things. Like for me to be able, like if you take the Bible and what the Bible says about faith, I think Pastor Shadow used to say, and I like the idea, like faith and doubt they are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And I like the idea because for me to actually walk in faith, I need to actually walk in doubt first. Because when Peter was walking on the water, he actually had to ask Jesus to call him out because he knew that he couldn't go because nobody walks in the water unless you're told by Christ. So the idea of faith is that the Christian has to understand that some things you will not get a rational answer for things because some things are beyond reason. Of course, God being three in one, it's beyond reason. Christ resurrecting from the dead, it's beyond reason. Christ running on water, it's beyond reason. But we know now that if God he is who he is, according to the Bible, then miracles
because of those are miracles.
Possible.
A lot of those are miracles.
Yes, but it's beyond reasons. So in your own life,
is revelation beyond reason?
Revelation is beyond reason in a way because we have to accept that God spoke.
It's an authority.
Yes, but if you believe that God exists, then it makes those miracles more possible in your life.
Right. So we view the Bible as revelation.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so then we accept its truth value.
Yes.
And if the way we approach apparent inconsistencies or something controversial, then we say, hey, we probably got something lacking in our understanding, right? You're also good in hermeneutics, right? I mean, you enjoy the subject.
I enjoy
I'm
the
sorry,
topic,
I didn't
yeah. I
ask
don't-
that very nicely, very well. I think you're good at hermeneutics, and I've been in that class as well. But yeah, that's a huge subject, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I also think that
Biblical hermeneutics, which is for
Yeah.
our audience, just the tools to study scripture,
the art of it's not
Right.
just scriptures. Actually, hermeneutics is also
for sure.
yeah. It's you take a piece of literature and you have to understand what it is to be able to understand it properly.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
But you obviously, in the context of your class, would be understanding the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you don't read the book of Psalms just like you read the book of Romans. It's not the same type of literature.
That means we're gonna need you on another episode, I think. Hermeneutics, that'd be great. So I'm really interested in young people understanding their place in this world because this world is very real to them, and it's pulling them, their attention, their desires, all the more. And Tim Keller said it really well, like not to like escape from the world and not to embrace the world but to be a faithful Christian presence in the world, right? And that's going to take a robust individual to handle that, to
Yes.
field that, to navigate the world as it is today. Because it's very, like we said, it's hostile to faith. It's a post-Christian culture in that sense.
Yes. I think it's in a way it's like being a Christian that walks in this world is just like having, if you take your car because you're going somewhere, it helps you decide which road you're taking and which road you're not taking. If you want to go to Florida, you don't take 95 north from here. Otherwise, you won't get there. So it's the same thing with my convictions. If I want to be a witness in this world, I've got to know what I believe and why. It's important and if I want to be an effective witness, also, I've got to be able to, or even to protect myself, I have to be able to discern right away what road I'm taking, what road I'm not taking. And I think apologetics has a very effective way of helping people do that. Like if you know what you believe and you know why you believe, and the stronger your convictions are, the more your attitude will actually be Christ-like. Because I also realized that it's very interesting to me that the stronger your convictions are, the less violently you'll be tempted to defend them. The weaker your convictions,
This is good. Yeah.
the weaker your convictions are, the more violently you will try to convince because you're afraid you're wrong.
Right. Stronger meaning like secure in them.
Secure.
Right. Like I've got a good grasp of what I'm talking about.
I know what
or
I'm
what
talking
I
about.
believe.
I know what I believe. I know why I believe it. I'm not offended by your questions.
You challenge someone that's not so secure in what they believe, that's going to ruffle their feathers. They're going to be more perturbed.
Yeah, and I see that actually when you look at social media, sometimes it's disturbing for me to see how Christians address some issues in this world because I'm thinking, why do you have to say that? You know, it's like you're not helping anyone, you're not helping yourself, you're not helping the kingdom of God by answering this way. Because one of the key things also in apologetic is the attitude in which we're doing this. Jesus says to his disciples in John 13:35, they will know you are my disciple by the love you have for each other. And he also says, 1 Peter 3:15, when you answer, you have to answer with meekness and respect. And if we don't do that, then we come across as being arrogant. And we might say, well, I'm Christian, I'm humble. But in our attitude, if we're arrogant, we actually are losing the battle in conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm encouraged because I see, and what I've been told is that there's like a renaissance in Christian thought and Christian thought leaders, right? Like maybe the last 30 years or something. Guys like Alvin Plantinga that made big moves on the theoretical level, right, for Christianity. And the apologetic side of things is like exciting because there's like tons of literature, right? And getting that into the churches is exciting as well because it's going to really equip the young people for their own sake to navigate the tough terrain ahead in our country. It's very tough terrain politically, socially, spiritually in our country right now, America. And then to be a more effective witness to people, to the lost.
I mean, apologetic was very unpopular until the 1950s and 60s, you know, in the Western world, almost since the Reformation, because it was almost seen as the opposite of faith. in which it was because of Thomas Aquinas, who during the Middle Age, the 14th and 15th century, when they actually was really relying a lot on evidence and rational. People were thinking you can have both ways,
that you can't have both ways.
You cannot have both ways. You cannot be rational and actually live by faith. Until 1950s and 60s, when we have this, as you said, renaissance of Christian thinkers that were godly, that actually tried to take back apologetics to a more biblical approach. And even though they were theoretical and philosophers, Christian philosophers, they actually were people that inspired Christians by their life, also as much as by their writings.
Great.
So it made a difference for apologetics. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, so great to have you on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. And thank you guys. Until next time.
All right.